should take a dive or something like that. So I got a couple notes. I promise this isn't too bad. So I assume since most of the ways these speeches are supposed to start out is by explaining who I am, but since you guys are all here, you probably know already all about that. So I'm gonna skip it. But however, here's the most important thing to know about me is that I am not a politician.
Thank God.
And this is not about politics. This is about trying something completely new. I am, however, an entrepreneur and a technologist. I founded FARC in 1999, a few years after the World Wide Web was invented. And I mention that because one of my skills is to see things shaping up in the future that are going to happen rapidly before everybody else notices them. Now in Silicon Valley, they call this a disruptive event. It's a disruptive technology. And basically it's what happens when you have a technology like, for example, Uber disrupting taxis, when you have Amazon disrupting retail sales. These things occur on a regular basis. And sitting where I sit in the media ecosphere, I realized pretty early on last year that there may be something like this already happening in politics. And that's sort of my guilty secret is that I'm not necessarily leading the charge. I think I'm catching the wave. And the wave is this. In the last couple of years, we've seen things happen in politics that we have not seen happen before. We have seen independent candidates in Rhode Island grab 22% of the gubernatorial vote for $35, just because everybody wanted somebody else to run. And that's not the only place it's happened either. You had Tim Wu, who is a Columbia journalism professor. Maybe he was actually, whatever, look it up. You guys have Google, figure it out. Who basically ran to do sort of similar to what I was doing. You know, let's try something different in politics. And he managed to nab 40% of the lieutenant governor's vote in New York on a budget of $300,000 with relatively no media coverage. And he still managed to do it. But the thing that really put me over the edge was what happened with the net neutrality vote recently, where 1 million people called the FCC, emailed, called, wrote in, and said, hey, we want net neutrality. Now, whether or not you know what net neutrality is doesn't matter. The greater point was this. That was not politics. That was not a political movement. There were no TV commercials run for it. It was literally, hey, my friends, net neutrality is really important. Please call the FCC. And their friends going, okay. That was all it took. Recently, a counter bill was introduced to sort of, to work against this in Congress. And I posted a note saying, everybody needs to get up and call their congressman to tell them to stop it. Somebody posted back, they said, well, I don't know, have you read this? How do you know this is any good? And my response was, 1 million people didn't call the FCC and ask for it. That's what's changed. And I've lost my words. So, let me give you an idea of what you're in for, because people keep asking me, what is your platform, what are the issues? And the problem is that a lot of these issues are straw man arguments that are basically put out there to divide us. Things that are not particularly the most important thing, not the topic of the day. They're actually put out there to make sure that we are afraid of the other guy winning, so that we back the candidate that is the least despicable to us. And so it's hard to talk about these in terms of issues, but let me give you what I've come up with as my platform, which I have called the most boring campaign platform ever. You ready? We should probably serve coffee after this, whether it's It's very simple. It's no experiments, leave people alone, and don't spend money you don't have. I feel like Kermit the Frog in the movie. Politics needs to be disrupted, but government doesn't. Government needs to be fixed. The problem with government as we currently have it is that there's no way to actually get any good laws passed, provided that somebody has an interest and a lot of money on the other side. I did a thought experiment that I'll be putting online later on one of the issues, right to work, because people wanted to know what I thought about it. So I decided to do some research and figure out, well, okay, so what does the research say? Is it a good thing to have it, or is it not a good thing to have it? And you can read my sort of in-depth thoughts on that later on. The answer is it's more or less unclear, but trending badly for unions. But the greater point is this. Let's say I'm not governor, and right to work hits the desk. What happens to the other candidate? Whatever party it is, this is how it goes. Legislation shows up, check my donor list, decide. No research, no looking into is this a good idea, no exploration of are there any downline effects, how many people might accidentally be injured by this. Nope, Don't care. Did I get paid to do this? Oh, I did. Well, I'm passing it. And this has been going on for quite a while to this point where in the last spending bill, I don't know if you guys caught this, the only reason I did is because I've been looking at this for a while, was that two things got slipped in there which were actually really abhorrent. The first one was, and this is actually something that's going to impact me directly, they raised the federal spending limit on what you can donate to a party as an individual to over $300,000. Now why that matters is because in Kentucky, you can only donate to a candidate $1,000, unless you're a political party, in which case it's unlimited. So if you wanted to make sure that you could wipe me out in 2 seconds with money, and by the way, this isn't like a secret, so it's not like I'm spoiling this. You could go to the federal level, give them a whole bunch of money, earmark it to go against me, and I guarantee that's going to happen. Guarantee. All day long. It's okay though, because as long as you have scenarios when 1 million people can call the FCC and say, we want this, no amount of money in the world can buy against that. You're just pretty much golden. And so that is essentially what I need from everybody in this room, is that kind of a thing. The second thing that's been going on recently is we actually have corporations writing legislation and inserting it into laws, and that was the second thing that was slipped into the spending bill. Citibank wrote legislation. They found a guy and paid him to put it in there. Now I'm sure he would call it not being paid to do it, but well, maybe he just thought it was a good idea. They know this because it was floated. Citibank actually had this legislation going through to other congressmen saying we would like to see this thing passed. And you know what it did? It took away a lot of the regulations that were put on them to stop another crash like 2008 from happening. Now how did that happen exactly? Did 1 million people call up Congress and say, hey, we want Citibank to have less regulation so they can screw the economy again? Because that'd be great. No, that's not what happened at all. Recently in Michigan, we had a situation where they actually outlawed the ability to buy Tesla cars from Tesla Motor Company unless they bought it from a dealership. Tesla sells cars online. They actually also carved out everything up to any car company created earlier than the 21st century, which is more or less everybody. In Louisville recently, they banned Uber from picking up people at the airport. How did that get passed? Did 1 million people call up Louisville's government and say, oh, you know what the critical problem today is? Uber's picking people up. We have to get on this right now. This is a vital part. No, absolutely not. And so what I'm proposing basically is something that would sound like it runs against my no experiments plank, which is basically, if it hasn't been done here, we are not doing it, or if it hasn't been anywhere else, we are not doing it here. We need proof of concept. Kentucky does not have to be the first to do experimental legislation that we don't know the impact of. But we can copy other states all day long. And so that's one of my rules. I might think something's a good idea, but if it's never been done, we're not doing it. So one of the things I stumbled upon recently is that a friend of mine up in Washington State is doing something really interesting. And this is where discussing issues becomes problematic, because this is the thing I want to do more than anything else, and I could not remotely call this an issue because it isn't. And it's basically this. I call it the broken windows theory for government. You guys all familiar with the broken windows theory? It basically states that, and by the way, it's not this simple, but it basically states that if you have an area that's got a lot of crime, there will be a lot of broken windows. If you fix the broken windows, the crime goes away. Not that simple, but the greater concept still holds, which is fix a lot of small annoyances, and you will solve a much larger problem. And so what my friend did was he went to Washington State, and he got a grant, and he basically said, why don't we use a tenet from the lean startup model, which is basically how do you start a company with no money? And it's a really dumb thing. It's called customer development. What does that mean? Go out and ask people, hey, I'm going to start a company that does this. Will you buy it? Seems crazy, right? But nobody actually does that. They come up with these ideas, they roll them out the door. So the idea is basically, well, how about that for government? How about we go out and basically say, hey, the last time you interfaced with government, how'd that go? Was it good? Was it bad? What can we fix? And so they went out to 120 business people because it was just an easy subset. They interface with the government more than anybody else does. And they found thousands of things that they didn't know were wrong. And a lot of them are really easy to fix. They found a particular problem involving farmers where they had been backed into a corner due to laws that have been placed on how they can fertilize their fields over the last 20 years, one every 5 years, that had essentially created a no-win situation. That anything that they did was going to break the law. And so that's a relatively easy to fix, but nobody knew that was going on because the farmers thought nobody in government cares. Because they're not coming around and asking us, how are things going? And so my friend actually had really, really good success with this up in Washington State, so I'm proposing doing that here. In fact, we're going to start tonight. After I'm done, I would like everybody to come and tell me a story, if it's relevant or funny, or something that needs to be heard in general, about the last time you interfaced with government and how you would fix it. Because there's tons of things like that. There are all kinds of laws on the books that make no sense, especially around craft beer distribution, as I've been learning from Chris. He's been crash coaching me 3 or 4 times a week for the past month and a half. And there are other industries as well. Every industry has got the annoyances that they've just given up on government being able to fix. Well, what if we flipped it around? What if we actually tasked people to go out into the field and find people who basically can tell us, how was your experience with government? What do you think we can fix? And even if they don't know how to fix it, we can then engineer these solutions to these problems. And it's a relatively simple idea that no one's doing, but that is actually the first thing I would do. Which, again, like I said, sounds a little bit, far-fetched, but it's worth it. Where am I here? I'm about done, by the way, don't worry. So, basically, in order to pull this off, we're going to need a lot of contributions, obviously. And so this is the part where I actually have to shake you all down for money. But here's the good news. One of the things that I realized about the way this is being done, the way I'm running this campaign is that if I end up getting in office as an unaligned governor who cannot be touched by influence money, that actually breaks the entire system that they've set up in Frankfurt. There's no way to buy influence. If they can't buy me, they can't buy any law anywhere in the state for the next 4 years. And that means that at that point, the only thing that passes any law is prove it works. And preferably find me somewhere else that it did. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. That is what I'm trying to bring to us. So, in order to do this, though, I've got a huge problem because, as you've just heard, I have torched every chance of getting any dollar out of any corporation. That ain't going to happen. And it turns out that most political contributions come from corporations looking to buy influence, usually. But in this particular case, the only thing that's going to carry me through the day is essentially whether or not you all collectively here and then watching the recorded version of this believe that there's any merit to this. And the only way to get this to go through is I need the support. If you want to see an interesting version of this, go look at Larry Lessig's TED Talk online where he talks about basically the problem with influence money in politics. And he points out something really interesting. If every person who voted gave $5 to the candidate they were voting for, that would be, in the aggregate, so much larger than all of the influence money in the system that politicians wouldn't even look at the influence money at all. We would end up with a situation like what happened at the FCC. 1 million people called up, and it doesn't matter how much money is on the other side, it's done. And so in order to get there, I need your all help to do that. And I need your voices. Every single one of you in this room has at least a couple dozen people who pay attention to everything you guys do in social media. You guys are thought leaders for somebody. I need you to tell all of them about this, and tell them why they should care. And then if they decide that or not, we're not trying to convince them. This is literally just lay it out there. Here it is. Why don't we try something new? Thank you.